Okay, welcome everyone. I'm MJ Winter with Friends of the Owyhee. Um, we really appreciate everyone tuning in for this Birds of the Owyhee webinar. Um, Friends of the Owyhee exists to build community around conservation, advocacy, stewardship, responsible recreation in the Owyhee region. And we also have it's very dear to our heart to have educational webinars occasionally for people to hear interesting topics about the Owyhee. So we contacted Golden Eagle Audubon Society in Southwest Idaho in Boise, Idaho. And they offer birding trips for all ages, monthly educational presentations, community science programs, as well as conservation and restoration of public lands. So they recommended for us one of their people there, Louisa Evers. She has been a birder with 30 plus years of experience, mostly in the Western US, even though she grew up in East Tennessee. Louisa retired from the Oregon Washington State office of the BLM at the end of 2018 and moved to Caldwell, Idaho in May of 2019. She immediately got involved with both Golden Eagle Audubon Society and the Southwestern Idaho Birders Association. She serves on the board of directors for both organizations, leads field trips, chairs the Golden Eagle Education Committee, gives presentations, and arranges for speakers for the Southwestern Idaho Birders Association. During the initial phases of COVID, when everyone had to stay apart, Louisa started developing bird presentations for Golden Eagle and continues to do so today. So we are going to turn this over to Louisa. I have the meeting recording, and so we will be able to access the meeting afterwards. And at the end of Louisa's presentation, we'll take some questions. If you click on the chat button at the bottom of your screen, you can put your questions in the chat as you think of them through the presentation, and then we'll get to those at the end if Louisa hasn't answered them during the presentation. Does that sound good? Okay, Louisa, take it,
All right.
take it over.
Okay, let me share my screen. Share. Bring this up. Okay, we'll get her started here. So, welcome to this Birds of the Owyhees. I'm happy to do this for you guys. And we might give it to our Golden Eagle group too, since it's already done. Just so you know, I'm not that familiar with the Owyhees. I'm somewhat familiar with the Idaho side, but certainly not the Oregon side or the Nevada portion. So one of the things I had to do to try to figure out what to cover was come up with an analysis process. So what I did is I got a map of the area. I decided to use eBird and look for hotspots in eBird where you can get bar charts of the birds that have been seen. And then I built a spreadsheet about which species were occurring where, in which county. And then I used that to identify species that were uncommon to rare, vagrant, as well as the ones that were relatively common, and also some species that are more typical of certain types of habitats. Oops, wrong way. So here's the map I found of the Owyhee Basin. It doesn't, some of the hotspots I chose, at least in Idaho, are here in the foothills, since that is technically part of the Owyhees, even though the streams drain into the Snake. And I didn't know what was similar to that in Nevada or in Oregon. And as you can see, it's, oh, stop it. The Owyhees are mostly in the Owyhee County of Idaho, Malheur County of Oregon, and a little piece of Elko County in Nevada. It also has a little chunk in Humboldt and a tiny, tiny little piece in Harney County. But the information I drew from was for Malheur, Owyhee and Elko counties. So using the map in the previous slide, I went to the Explore function in eBird and selected Explore Hotspots. You can type in the county name and then zoom in to the resulting map until you reach the little teardrops like you see on the screen here that indicate where a hotspot is located. No doubt there's many personal locations that could further enrich the available data, but I didn't have access to those. So for instance, I would click on an individual hotspot, for example, here, Antelope Reservoir, and then look at the bar chart to get a list of the birds that's been reported in that location for as long as lists have been submitted. Overall, the Owyhee Basin, with a few exceptions, has been pretty lightly birded as far as eBird is concerned. This particular location here in Antelope Reservoir is apparently fairly accessible and has a good number of checklists. However, most of the areas within the basin, especially into the mountainous part, are not accessible in winter and apparently have limited accessibility in spring and fall, likely due to the general lack of roads and the rarity of paved roads. I mean, as you probably know, most of the roads in the basin are unpaved and either gravel or native surface. So this is the number of hotspots in each county that I used. Frankly, I'm not sure all the hotspots in Owyhee County actually fall in the Owyhee Basin. It's often difficult to figure out if a particular hotspot was in or out. For example, Poison Creek Recreation Site and Purdue Canyon. I'm pretty sure those are in the foothills to the Owyhees, but I'm not positive. But I know they're close. Malheur County, as you can see, has the most hotspots, and I actually didn't use all of them. It seemed like 15 would give me some really good data. Elko County has the least number of hotspots, and one of those, the Rabbit Draw workstation, has only 2 checklists. However, given the lack of hotspots in that county, I felt I had to use every one of them, even Rabbit Creek. So let's look at what I found, and I'll start off with some summaries. So total number of species that have occurred at least once in this area is 259. That's quite a few species. It's pretty rich. As you can see, Owyhee and Malheur counties have nearly the same number of species, although there are important differences in what species can be found. Elko County has fewer species, but at least some of that is due to the relatively low number of checklists that's been submitted. And this area is in the headwaters of the Owyhee River. And to put it in another perspective, those things in parentheses, for example, I went to the Idaho Records Committee to see a checklist of Idaho birds, and that's 432 species. And I was surprised to find that over half of this total number of species that you can see in Idaho can be seen in Owyhee County in the hotspots that I selected. So that's a pretty indicator of how rich the Owyhees are. So it's a percentage is lower for Malheur County, I think mostly because Oregon includes seacoast. So there's a lot of different kinds of birds along the coast compared to what we might find in Idaho, which is landlocked. And actually, I was surprised to find that Nevada has a high number of species too, probably just due to the high number of habitats that they have. So, and again, the number of or the percentage of Nevada birds found in Elko County is low due to the lack of data, I think more than anything. So I found that there were 26 species that are widespread. These are species that can be found almost anywhere in the Owyhees. And the way I decided what was widespread is these occurred in over half the hotspots analyzed for all 3 counties. So take a look at this list, and what else can anyone tell me about the species that are on it? Anyone want to volunteer? Is there something in the chat? Oh well. Okay, like I said, not only are these common in the Owyhees, these are common in the Intermountain West. So no real surprise that these are the common and widespread species in the Owyhees. So what makes a species uncommon to rare? In this case, the species included, which are too many to list, occurred in less than a third of the hotspots and usually not in all three counties, although many occurred in two of the counties. Often these are species that are reported in low numbers whenever they did show up, and they can be uncommon to rare due to limited habitat availability, limited population, and just too few observations of the species. And would anyone like to guess what some of these uncommon to rare species might be?
What about white-faced ibis?
That's one of them.
I happened to see one of those south of Jordan Valley last week. So yeah.
Yeah, like for instance, of the shrikes, the loggerhead shrike, if I remember correctly, is relatively common, but the northern shrike is not. So I do have a spreadsheet if you want me to share that with the group so they can take a look at it.
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay. Okay, and then next are the vagrants. A vagrant is a species that occurs outside its normal range. Often these are spotted during migration, sometimes as young birds in particular. They tend to wind up in following the wrong species from their breeding range. Other times it's because a bird's navigation is off, or a storm blew in a bird that normally would not pass through the area. And often vagrants are present for only a short time. I'm sure people who have birded here have heard of the one-day wonders. We just had a two-day wonder here, a Pacific golden plover, which was everybody dashed out to see it. And of course, something like a Hudsonian godwit, that's definitely an oddball to show up in our part of the world. Anyway, often a special case can occur when a species is expanding its range. Oddly enough, many of the expanding species first show up in winter. I guess if they figure if they can make it through winter, they can make it through the rest of the year. An example I have, it's not from the Owyhees, it's from the Treasure Valley, is the Anna's hummingbird. Anna's first started appearing in the Treasure Valley in the 1910s in winter, but breeding wasn't documented until 2019. And since then, the number of Anna's hummingbirds in the Treasure Valley has been slowly increasing. And again, I'm not familiar enough with the Owyhee Basin to know which species might be in the process of expanding their range. Some of them I think might be is like the Scott's oriole or the pinyon jay, maybe the Plumbeus vireo. I know elsewhere red-shouldered hawk is expanding its range. So it could be interesting to kind of keep an eye on some of these species and see how often they start showing up. So with these summaries out of the way, I'll go into some birds that we find in different habitats. And I've broken these into birds of forests and woodlands, birds of sagebrush and grasslands, and birds of water bodies and riparian areas. Some of these will have sound, so hopefully everybody can hear them. So we'll start with the birds of the forests and the woodlands. These areas, this habitat type occurs primarily in Owyhee and Elko counties where we have the mountains. And the lands leading up to these peaks are steep, interspersed with valleys of varying size. Much of the area in Owyhee County is dominated by western juniper. I'm not familiar with Elko County, so can't say much about the vegetation, except the species of birds present suggest what might be there. I know towards the higher peaks, based on the Owyhee County, vegetation becomes mixed conifer, supporting a mix of western juniper in the rockier, drier locations, ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and some true firs. There's brushy patches, both in the openings and in the understories. And there's meadows. They're kind of interspersed within the trees. Some birds are found primarily in juniper woodland, some primarily in mixed conifer, and others are a little more widely dispersed. And I'll try to remember to tell you which birds are migratory and which birds are resident. So we'll start with the common poorwill. This is a migratory bird. They should be showing up most any day now if they haven't already in some areas. And you're more likely to hear a poorwill than see one. These birds are namesayers. So listen for these birds near dusk and dawn in dry forest and woodland. I mostly hear them in juniper. And in the spring, the male sings out its name. So let's listen to the common poorwill. So everybody kind of hear that name, that poor Will, poor Will, poor Will. Anyway, so during the day, these birds are aerial insect eaters. They feed primarily at night. That's usually when you hear them calling, is at night. During the day, they roost on the ground, and they blend into their surroundings quite well with that mottled plumage. And they're very easy to miss because of that. At night, they also may take a break by landing in a road. So look for eye shine if you're driving the Owyhee mountain roads at night. And unfortunately, this habit of landing on roads means a number are struck and killed. So please pay attention to them. So our next bird is the Calliope hummingbird. This bird is also a migrant. It nests in the higher elevations. The female is greenish gold above and whitish below. And this is a male. He has that colorful gorget that he spreads and displays during the breeding season. They come readily to feeders. A good place to see Calliope hummingbirds is in the Silver City area. I'm not sure where else you might see these guys, but man, they're cute. The northern goshawk was recently split into two species based on geographic area and genetics. So instead of the northern goshawk, we now have the American goshawk. These birds breed in semi-open to closed conifer forest, but can be seen at lower elevations in winter. So they're more of an elevational migrant than a long-distance migrant or state crossing migrant. So this is our largest accipiter. And for those that don't know, an accipiter is a raptor that specializes in hunting other birds. The way these birds are, their structure is they have wings and tail that allows them to maneuver between the trees quite readily. The eyes of immature birds are yellow, and the adults have red eyes. This is an adult bird right here. Immature birds are also brown with leaf-like streaks on their undersides, while the adults are gray with finely barred breasts and bellies. This picture I took this January in Canyon Hill Cemetery. I think it was the first time we'd had one show up here in Caldwell in the cemetery. Our next little bird is a cute little bird. This is the gray flycatcher. It tends to be in edges between open woodland and sagebrush. It's what we call an impid flycatcher. It's part of the Impidnax group of flycatchers. They can be difficult to identify as they're rather plain looking birds with two wing bars, which unfortunately describes a lot of impid flycatchers. However, for a flycatcher, it has a relatively long tail and bill. You'll notice that lower bill is mostly orange, and it has that white eye ring. However, one of the key ways to identify this bird is its behavior. It has a habit of slowly lowering its tail and then raising it rapidly. One way to remember this behavior is gray lady down. You see a bird doing gray lady down, you've probably got a gray flycatcher. It usually forages near eye level, flying out to catch an insect and then returning to its perch. And like I said, like most flycatchers, the gray flycatcher is a migrant. All it eats is insects. It typically arrives in the Owyhees in late April to early May. So hopefully they are starting to be around. And it has a very simple song, which is common to these impid flycatchers. And these impid flycatchers are interesting in that they do not learn their songs, they're born with them. Our next bird, this is a resident bird. This is the mountain chickadee. It can co-occur with the black-capped chickadee. And of course, the main difference between the two birds is this white eyebrow on the mountain chickadee. And it has gray sides, whereas the black-capped chickadee has, a solid black crown, and it has buffy sides. And both the call and the song differ from the black-cap as well. So the call of the mountain chickadee, it does the chickadee-dee call, but it's much hoarser sounding. Okay, and the black-capped chickadee's song is often rendered as Phoebe or Hey, sweetie. The mountain chickadee song is completely different. My best mnemonic is dee 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 dee. Let's listen to their song. Well, hopefully when you hear both that hoarse chickadee or that little dee 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 song, you'll realize that somewhere around you is a mountain chickadee. I bet most people know this bird. This is, of course, the mountain bluebird. The male is this electric blue, particularly when the sun shines on them. They're just gorgeous. The female's a duller blue, and she tends to have some rufous sides. And during the migration, you can see these birds at lower elevation, but they typically nest in juniper woodland. The road out of Jordan Valley towards Silver City has a series of bluebird boxes. They're not visible from the road, but they attract a number of these birds in the area where they can be easily seen. So bluebirds are cavity nesters and they take readily to bird boxes, although tree swallows may compete with them for the same box. And the way some people who put bird boxes up in their yard deal with it, where they're in mountain bluebird habitat, is they'll put two boxes back to back, and then the bluebird can have one box and the tree swallow can have the other box, and they're fine with that. And one thing I've noticed is for improving sage grouse summer range, the BLM is cutting down a lot of the juniper, at least in Owyhee County, Idaho BLM. I don't know what that's going to wind up meaning for the mountain bluebird population. Here's another migrant. This is the black-throated gray warbler. It's another species that's strongly associated with juniper woodlands. And like nearly all warblers, this is a small active bird that's rarely still, so it could be hard to get your binoculars on them. The male has a black throat, so this picture is of a male, while the female has a white throat uh, with a black necklace. Both both sexes have a yellow spot. You can just barely see it on this bird right here between the eye and the bill, and this is an area called the lore for those not familiar with it. And then they have coarse black streaks on their sides. They have a broad black mask with white above and below it, a black crown, and a gray back. And it has this buzzy little song. I think, if I remember correctly, a common mnemonic for that is Zeedle, Zeedle, Zeechek. So you hear that buzzy little song in the juniper, start looking for a black-throated gray warbler. So those are a few of the birds, a handful of the birds from the forests and woodlands. So now let's look at some birds of sagebrush and grasslands. So Malheur County and the higher elevation sagebrush steppe of Owyhee and Elko counties are where to find these birds. While the sagebrush may be the dominant shrub species, it's often intermixed with other shrubs such as rabbit brush, maybe some horsebrush, things like that. And which shrubs it's mixed with depends on such factors as the soil depth and alkalinity, precipitation amount, and the temperature regime. How low does it get in the winter and how hot does it get in the summer in particular? So the grasslands themselves are less common, and the highest quality grasslands are dominated by native bunch grasses with abundant forbs. Unfortunately, many of our grasslands, as well as the lower elevation sagebrush, is now dominated by invasive annual grasses such as cheatgrass and medusa head, as you can see by some of the big fires that we get. And there's a lot of invasive forbs such as tumble mustard and thistles. And while some birds can use these degraded ecosystems, bird abundance and species richness is lower. However, the abundant rock formations, particularly in Malheur County, provide additional habitat in these particular ecosystems. So some of the birds we'll be looking at tend to use these rocky areas. We'll start with the golden eagle. So these large rocky cliffs, particularly in Malheur County, provide nesting sites for golden eagles. These birds are often seen soaring high overhead. They have a slight V shape to the wings, and when they bank, you can see the golden nape, also known as hackles, on both the adult and young birds. And if you see a golden eagle perched, like this one here, the legs are feathered all the way down to the feet, whereas a bald eagle's legs are not. Young golden and bald eagles are often confused, so be aware of that. Young golden eagles have a white base to the tail and white wing patches, particularly on the underside of the wings, whereas young bald eagles are mottled white to varying degrees. Golden eagles take 4 to 5 years to reach breeding age, and golden eagle reproduction is highly dependent on the jackrabbit population. So when the jackrabbit populations are high, eagle reproductive success is high. And when they're low, eagle reproductive success is low. And they've been low for a number of years. I've noticed in Owyhee County that we're starting to see a few more jackrabbits, but nothing compared to what they used to have. I'm not entirely sure what all's behind that. Some of it is disease. I think there was a hemorrhagic fever I heard that swept through the jackrabbits and really decimated them. And then, of course, these fires converting the habitat to annual grass dominated, that doesn't provide habitat for jackrabbits. Here's one of our iconic birds of the Owyhees, the greater sage grouse. They depend on high quality sagebrush steppe. Malheur County has most of the remaining good habitat in the Owyhees. Uh, Owyhee County is fairly poor anymore. So on the left, that's where the male really stands out with his white ruff, his throat sacs, and his little phyllo plumes, which are these little feathers right here standing out from the back of his neck. The male has more white on it, on the breast than the female. Otherwise, these are both just brown birds that blend in really well with their vegetation. So sage grouse depend on sagebrush during winter, but they eat insects and other plants for much of the rest of the year. And of course, as you probably know, populations of greater sage grouse have plummeted in large part due to the combination of invasive annual grasses and high severity wildfire, which prevents the sagebrush from reestablishing. We've also had some issues with juniper encroachment, which is one of the reasons the BLM has been cutting down juniper, and human development. So things like power line corridors coming through the habitat. So whenever anything is more than 4 feet tall, sage grouse move out of the area because it provides perch sites for aerial predators of the bird. Cheated a little bit. I've got 2 birds here on this one. Tree and violet green swallows. They're both common and they can be easily confused. So tree swallows have blue backs and white undersides, and they have a black mask that can sometimes be difficult to see. They have a white chin as well. Violet green swallows have green backs and white undersides, and that white extends into their face and kind of surrounds the eye. They also have white that extends onto the rump. In the case of the tree swallow, it just barely comes up. And the violet green swallow, it almost completely wraps around. There's often just a thin little strip of like green between the white patches. Both birds use bird boxes and tree cavities as nest sites, and violet green swallows will nest in the rock crevices, so they'll be more common in the rocky cliffs than the tree swallows will. And of course, both these birds hunt insects in open areas. You can often see them hunting over any kind of open water, pond or reservoir or whatever. Our next bird is also another bird of the rocky areas. This guy is here year round, and you may hear the song long before you see the bird. It's a great song. And then their call note is pretty distinctive too. A friend of mine likens their call note to a referee's whistle. So the canyon wren has that long, slightly downcurved bill, a brown back. Actually, it turns gray towards the head, so kind of a two-tone back. Has a white chin and breast, and a rufous belly and tail, and the tail is barred. But unlike some wrens, they rarely hold their tails cocked up. Usually, they're held down. I always enjoy listening to canyon wrens. Our next bird, these guys have started showing up in numbers. This is the sage thrasher. It's in the same family as mockingbirds. It often sings from the top of a sagebrush in spring. It's brown with a long tail. It's got those streaky, speckly undersides, a yellow eye. And the song is quite lovely, and it can mimic other birds. And this bird can be surprisingly difficult to spot. It's kind of a throws its voice, it seems, sometimes like meadowlarks do. You know how meadowlarks, it sounds like they're practically uh, on your hand and they're a quarter mile away, singing away like mad. I was on a field trip uh, this weekend, and we heard a sage thrasher singing on a hillside, and we looked and we looked and we looked, and we could not find the bird, but it was just clear as a bell. Oops, sorry, jumped ahead. So this is our the lark sparrow. It has this very distinctive facial pattern. So it has those rufous crown stripes that turn black right towards the bill. It has that rufous cheek patch, a black line through its eye, and a black mustache with a white throat. So you see there's white on the crown, above and below the eye, right here above that black mustache, and then a white throat. And it has this black spot. Otherwise, there's no streaking on the breast, unlike a lot of other sparrows. When it flies away, there's white tips on the outermost 2 to 3 tail feathers. So that's another way to identify them when it's flying away. It's usually found in sagebrush for short grasses, typically forages on the ground. And this is another interesting song. It's a variety of whistles and trills, occasionally interspersed with short, buzzy raspberries. That's the lark sparrow. Often where you have lark sparrows, you have river sparrows. This is a small plain sparrow. It's easy to overlook because it just doesn't really look like much of anything. It's got unstreaked undersides and otherwise just kind of a brown bird. Has a white eye ring, but sometimes you have to get close to see it. But it's got a very distinctive song. It's a series of short, buzzy phrases, and one friend likens this song to the sound of the sound that a rainbird sprinkler makes as it resets to begin sprinkling again. So we sometimes call this the rainbird bird. So look for brewer sparrows in open areas with shrubs and grasses at a variety of elevations. I typically tend to see them more in higher elevations or hear them more in higher elevations, but they go all the way down to the sagebrush steppe quite readily. There often seem to be in habitats where there is sagebrush present. So those are some of the birds of the sagebrush and grasslands. So we're going to finish off with about 7 birds that are found in areas with water or riparian areas. Too fast. So as you well know, the Owyhees have no natural lakes, but they do have abundant reservoirs and ponds and some natural wetlands. Reservoirs in the canyons, used primarily for irrigation, typically lack much habitat along the shoreline. Gets that bathtub ring instead. So they support mostly waterfowl, and there's a few shorebirds that might be present along those reservoirs. However, the smaller reservoirs and ponds on shallower ground that are usually like meant for cattle water or something like that can support abundant shorebirds and wading birds, especially in migration, as well as waterfowl. So natural wetlands support riparian-associated songbirds and wading birds. And high-quality wetlands and riparian areas have species like cattails, bulrushes, willows, and cottonwoods. Degraded wetlands and riparian areas are dominated by species such as Russian olive, Phragmites, reed canary grass, and annual kochia. As with sagebrush and grasslands, birds will still use these areas, but abundance and species richness is lower in these degraded areas. Fortunately, from what I've seen, there are a fair number of high quality riparian areas in the Owyhees. So our first bird is this beautiful red duck, the cinnamon teal, aptly named. He's got red eyes along with those red feathers. At least the male does. The female is duller, of course, as per usual. In flight, you can see powder blue on the forewing and green in the secondary flight feathers. The female is a mottled brown duck with a duller blue in the forewing. And the bills of these birds are large. They look outsized. They kind of look like somebody stuck a shoveler bill on a small duck. The male's bill is black and the female's is brown. Both sexes have a large white patch under the wings, so you might see that when they fly. Okay, they feed mostly on the water's surface, and they tend to be in shallower pools, not so much in deeper water, though they will go out into it for security purposes. Our next bird is the eared grebe. These small grebes tend to look very different in breeding plumage and non-breeding plumage. You actually get both eared and horned grebes, but eared grebes tend to be more common. So the top photo is an eared grebe in breeding plumage. It has that fan of goldish feathers centered on the eye and a red eye. And the bird on the bottom, this is the eared grebe in winter. So that fan of feathers is gone. And instead you see a white that goes under the eye and kind of wraps around the cheek. And it has a white throat. And all seasons, this bird has a fluffy butt that's very noticeable, except when it's just come up from a dive. So the bird at the bottom has just come up from a dive. And you see there's water droplets all over it. Okay, the head is peaked, unlike the horned grebe, which has a flat head. And they're, of course, they're a diving bird. They feed primarily on aquatic insects, crustaceans, mollusks, tadpoles, and small fish. Here's one of our more spectacular and large wading birds, the American avocet. This is, of course, a large shorebird, has those blue legs, a rust-colored head, and an upturned bill. And the body and the wings are black and white. And if you look carefully, like in this top photo right here, you'll see that the feet are partially webbed. This allows the avocet to swim, and it swims quite well. In non-breeding plumage, this rust color fades away, like it's fading away on that top bird, and it becomes just a black and white bird. The bottom bird, this is more in breeding plumage, so that rust is a lot more extensive on the head, neck, and into the breast. The degree of upturn on the bill helps you tell male from female. So the female has more of an up curve like the bottom bird. It's a little bit harder to tell with the top bird since its bill is open. And they often feed by sweeping their bills back and forth from side to side. Although the males, since their bill is a little straighter, they may stab at prey more often. And of course, these birds can be quite noisy. The only thing that's noisier is a stilt. The long-billed curlew, this is one of our largest sandpipers, although it's actually more at home in uplands than in water. And of course, the thing that stands out about this bird, besides its size, is that extremely long down-curved bill. And it's longer in females than it is in males. During migration, which was, it's less true now, but earlier on, you'd mostly see them like on mud flats and flooded fields, probing into the ground for insects. This particular picture was taken up at High Valley in Idaho. But it summers and nests on dry grasslands, and they eat mostly insects. In the spring, they can be recognized by their song, usually given in flight. Yep, missed one. Here, next little bird. This is a tiny little bird. In contrast to the long-billed curlew, this is the western sandpiper. It's the largest of the small sandpipers known as peeps, mostly because they had little peeping calls. Uh, the western sandpiper has a longish, black, down-drooping bill. It's quite white at the base comparative to a lot of other birds. Has brown upper parts and white underparts. And in breeding plumage, the shoulders, the crown, and the cheeks are rufous in color. The breast and flanks are streaky or spotted. So if you look at these two birds in the photo, the bird on the left has molted further out of breeding plumage and more into winter plumage, while the bird on the right still has a bit of the rufous. You can see it on the shoulder. In particular, if you look carefully, you can see it in the cheek, and it has some of the spots or streaking on the underside still there. So, and in the winter, it's more gray than brown. And that breast part, it only comes down through the shoulders and it doesn't connect across the breast, which is one way to help tell them apart from other peeps. They tend to feed in shallow water and mud flats, probing in the mud for invertebrates. They typically don't go very far into the water, but they do go some. This is the western sandpiper. Right now, there's a few of them starting to move through in our area. They breed up in the Arctic. They don't breed here, unfortunately. Our next bird is the white-faced ibis. It's named for this narrow ring of white feathers around the base of the bill. You can see it partially in this bird. This was a fall picture, so it's losing it. And it either partially or fully encircles the eye, depending on the time of year. The juvenile, which is the bird on the bottom, it lacks that white ring. And the adults have red bodies and backs, and they have that green iridescence in the wings and red legs. The juveniles are brownish to sooty in appearance, but they do show some of the iridescence in the wings, and their legs are black. The bill's long and down curved. They feed in water and flooded fields by probing for invertebrates, as well as crayfish, frogs, snails, and small fish. This is our last bird of riparian areas, the common yellowthroat, another little warbler, typically found in marshes, swamps, and wet thickets. Of course, the male, which is what we have here, is quite striking with that yellow breast, black mask, and the white bar above the mask. The female is kind of a plain yellowish bird that tends to stay in the vegetation and doesn't come out very often. So the song is quite distinctive. It's one of the few warbler songs that I have no difficulty remembering what they are. Come on. So one of the ways this song is translated into words is witchety, witchety, witchety. You should be aware that there are local dialects where birds may subtract syllables from the songs. Like when I lived in Western Oregon, those yellowthroats said witchy, witchy, witchy instead of witchety, witchety. And they have a pretty distinctive call note too. Helps you recognize that bird. So let's summarize the species present according to the eBird checklist from hotspots. Covered some of the relatively common birds in different habitats found in the Owyhees. And are there any questions?
So it looks like in the chat we do have Kira asking about invasive or migratory. I think during one of the sections that you were presenting. So those would just be birds that just came through. But as far as invasives,
No bird has really been called an invasive. We do have some exotics such as Eurasian collared dove, house sparrow, European starling. And of course, there are some introduced exotic birds, mostly game birds such as turkey, pheasants, chukar, um, gray partridge, but they aren't necessarily considered invasive birds. Mostly what we deal with are invasive plants.
okay, thank you for that distinction. Claudia mentions that, I think you can see in the chat, she's mentioning that an adult Swenson's hawk brought 2 juvenile eared grebes to her yard to feed their young. And
Oh my.
she says Terry Rich identified the eared grebes from the photos that she took. So he said they were most likely juvenile eared grebes, and she lives in Boise.
Okay, if it's recent, then they would be adults. They haven't nested yet. So I see um has the
Rhett
burning
Lawrence. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, has the burning of juniper in by BLM in the Owyhee impacted bird species as far as we know? It's a little too soon to know for sure. The and you know it's one of the trade-offs where you have a species that needs some help because we've allowed something like juniper encroachment to happen, and there's always trade-offs because you increase habitat for one species and decrease it for another. So here's one. Are nighthawks actually poor wills or a relative? Nighthawks are related to poor wills, but they're a different species.
Okay.
So they're a little easier to see and hear than the poor wills are. Well, somebody mentioned chickadee song sounds to me like cheeseburger. That's been one of the renditions.
Claudia mentions that this occurred in her yard last year.
Oh, last year. Okay, yeah.
Rhett Lawrence wants to ask, are golden eagle populations generally stable?
I know they have been in decline. They've had really poor reproductive success for several years in a row lately. I think there's some hope that they're starting to stabilize. I know there's been some really long-term studies going on in the Morley Nelson birds of prey in the Snake River Canyon, and they have seen golden eagle populations decline. But they're hoping that they're starting to stabilize as we see the jackrabbit populations start to come up.
Okay. Kira asks, is juniper encroachment a significant problem or a marketing tactic to remove more trees and wildlife lovers be less opposed to it?
It is a significant problem. One way to tell what we call post-settlement juniper is they typically have very pointed tops. They don't have the furrowed bark or the big branches. Um, and it has been pretty extensive since we removed fire from the ecosystem. Prior to removing fire, the juniper was typically kept into the rocky areas where fire doesn't burn very well. But they've been expanding greatly into the sagebrush steppe. A lot of birds, like Townsend solitaire, for example, eat juniper berries and then they fly out into the sagebrush and poop out seeds. And then next thing you know, you got juniper establishing, often using sagebrush as a nurse plant. Um, they don't use the trees that they cut. There's no market for them. So a lot of times I know people think that we're just cutting trees for timber production, but there's no timber market for juniper. So they just wind up having to burn them.
Beth asks, are goshawk common in Owyhee County? The forest type doesn't seem dense enough for them. Are they also found in juniper?
The goshawks are relatively common at the high elevations. I don't know what the population is. I haven't seen any information on that, but they're showing up often enough at those higher elevations that indicates that they are pretty common up there. I, I'm not aware of them being found in juniper except during migration. Most of the time, they seem to be in more of a mixed conifer type. And of course, the Owyhees don't have a whole lot of mixed conifer. Is there any
Anybody
other
else
questions?
have questions to put in the chat or to go ahead and ask?
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing unless somebody wants me to go back to a particular slide and ask a question about that. Have mountain quail been observed in the Owyhees? Not that I'm aware of. Mountain quail right now in Idaho, for the most part, the populations that are native are restricted to Idaho County, pretty much up in the Riggins area and the Seven Devils. They've been extirpated from much of Idaho. Did I take the recordings? No, I went to an app or a website called Xenocanto to get the recordings.
Have you noticed an increase? This isn't in the chat. This is just me since I did
Okay.
some LEC monitoring last week. Have you noticed an increase of coyote predation on sage grouse nests or the hens or anything like that?
I don't know about that. The I've been to the Cow Creek Lek now for 5 years. This year, I was very surprised. We had 60 birds, and I don't know if it was just the time that we were there. The timing was good to see that many birds versus other years where we've seen very few. Um, and yeah, coyote predation would be very difficult to track. That's more of a question for the state wildlife agencies, and they may or may not know either.
I know I did see some in a LEC last week, so and ODFW asked me to send pictures of the nest that had been wrecked and the hen that was partially eaten. So
Uh, yeah, there's particularly with the eggs and the chicks, it's like they're hors d'oeuvres for every predator out there. So, any projects I can help with when I hike the ODT this fall. What is the ODT?
So that would probably be Oregon Desert Trail. Is that correct, Dana? Yeah, the Oregon Desert Trail. That is, so that's something that we can ask Renee Patrick, who has been kind of the coordinator through ONDA, Oregon Natural Desert Association. She's been kind of the coordinator for the Oregon Desert Trail. And although she's been on hiatus a bit, she still could probably answer that question. Dana, if you want to just, I can contact you and try to put you in touch with Renee to ask if there's any specific. Oh, okay. Yeah, she is. But she may have some ideas for us, or whoever is watching the trail for her might have some ideas of what kind of projects we could work on. We are looking at maybe doing some like guzzler research. So you can also get with Friends of the Owyhee on that, and we can see if there's any guzzlers that we're looking to survey.
And if you just want to document what's occurring along the trail, iNaturalist is a good app to use to document whatever you see, and it's intended for all kinds of plants and animals, not as opposed to eBird, which is just birds.
Yeah, that's great that you're already doing that, Dana. That's helpful. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, we're at our time frame now. So I just want to really thank. Oh, there's one more here. Oh, just a comment that at Heart Mountain, at a lek, observers watched a coyote walk up to a male strutting and grabbed him and walked away while the others kept on performing. Yeah, on the leks that I did last week, I had so many coyotes around. I saw visible packs right near the leks, and heard them from every direction. So that I was kind of like, wow, this is a lot of coyote going on. So, but thank you, Louisa, so much for your presentation. We appreciate it and the information. This has been recorded and will be available on the Friends of the Owyhee website. And we'll also post the link on social media for folks to follow up if they missed any part of it. So,
Okay. And I'll email you a copy of the spreadsheet I created.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. That's awesome.
All righty.
Okay. Thanks, Louisa.
All right. Thank you.